Today's special, a roasted Guardian article with a side of grilled misandry. Folks, I'm sorry, but you're just going to have to pinch your noses and deal with this one. Alright, so I'm back with a video on men's rights, and as such, I think it's only appropriate that I add the Viper fedora to this video. Alright, now with that little bit of shtick out of the way, let's get on with the main part of this video. This was inspired by the gauntlet cast down before me by Twitter user @DragonCorsair. After I made a trollish comment on their reply to the Guardian's article, I didn't choose to be straight, white, and male. Are modern men the suffering sex? Now, I may be a card-carrying, metaphorical fedora-wearing men's rights activist, but even I'm not going to make the claim that men are the suffering sex. From this alone, the Guardian paints the false impression of the concept of human suffering as a zero-sum game, wherein if one side experiences hardship, the other side must, by default, experience none. Or any that they may experience should be irrelevant. Unfortunately, Guardian, that's not how this works. While the article's content is material for another video, shock horror, they cherry-pick examples and unnecessarily and still paint men as being overly entitled and ignorant, this video is dedicated to Dragon Corsair. So, how exactly did this little spat start? Simply enough, I decided to stick my nose into the public discourse and someone disagreed with what I had to say. You see, upon reading Dragon Corsair's comment, quote, "Not a fucking chance, sincerely a straight white man," end quote, I felt like a little turnabout reality check was in fair play. Quote, "One who doesn't speak for all straight white men," I replied under their original tweet, to which I was asked to, quote, "tell him how hard it is being a straight white man then." Well, my veggie-faced friend, allow me to enlighten you on legitimate, tangible, legal discrimination against men and boys in the developed world, as this is what I promised during our back and forth following those initial comments. For those of you who are unfamiliar, the CCRF is also known as the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, and that's where I'll be starting my video. In it, we find the broad list of rights and freedoms as guaranteed to Canadian citizens. I noted that I could really only speak in regards to my own country with any real certainty, and so I thought that this would be the best place to start. The section we will be focusing on for the purposes of this video will be Section 15, subsections 1 and 2, which read as follows. Quote, "Equality rights. Equality before and under the law and equal protection and benefit of law." Subsection 1. Every individual is equal before and under the law and has the right to equal protection and equal benefit of the law without discrimination and, in particular, without discrimination based on race, national or ethnic origin, color, religion, sex, age, or mental or physical disability. Side note, this is not part of the quote, that has been amended, or at least is considered now to cover sexuality as well. Back to these sections. Under affirmative action programs, subsection 2. Subsection 1 does not preclude any law, program, or activity that has as its object the amelioration of conditions of disadvantaged individuals or groups, including those that are disadvantaged because of race, national or ethnic origin, color, religion, sex, age, or mental or physical disability. Bracket 84, it cites a piece down at the bottom. Again, now considered also covers sexuality as well, rightfully so. Now, if left to its own, Section 15, subsection 1 is a great bit of legislation with a truly egalitarian sentiment. However, when you undermine subsection 1 with the addition of subsection 2, you change the attitude of the overall section from an egalitarian one to one of adding special privileges. Now, to give you an example of how the protection under the law is not applied equally by cause of this section, I have some anecdotal as well as some well-documented examples. So let's hit the rewind and take you back to 2009, my senior year of high school, and the assault and battery committed against me by a group of my fellow students. I was, for over a year and a half, documented by both myself and the school, targeted with abuse in the form of verbal insults focused primarily on homophobic slurs, as well as physical battery, being shoved face first into the ground from behind while walking home, slammed against lockers, and having a pellet gun shot at me, etc., all accompanied by further homophobic slurs. Well, I took the documentation that I had and the witnesses I had to the school, and they read the riot act insofar as they could to the students involved, even going so far at my request as to call in the police liaison officer, essentially the person who works as the go-between, an actual police officer works as the go-between between high schools and the regional police force. You would think this would be evidence against the proposition I've put forth here, but there's a kicker. When the police officer sat down with me to discuss the potential courses of action beyond academic recourse, I was asked, flat out, well, are you gay? After I asked if there was a human rights or hate crime avenue available here. I asked this because their attacks were very obviously motivated by their presumption that I was gay. When I asked the officer why it would matter if I was, he said that, if I wasn't gay, there would be no grounds for bringing any such action against them, regardless of their motivation. Of course, this is only a political anecdote. However, I'm of the belief that if somebody's motivation, the reason they are targeting you and attacking you, is because of their perception of your sexuality, race, or any of those above mentioned issues, that should immediately become a human rights issue. They are being motivated by hate. Now, I'm not one to rely only on anecdotal evidence, though, so let's take a look at a particularly tragic case and the sobering statistics around it. You see, examples of the government and government agencies discriminating against straight men and men in general can be seen in the experiences of the late Earl Silverman, the man who created Canada's only shelter dedicated solely to male victims of domestic violence, and the men he sought to help. Earl Silverman took his own life in 2013 after being forced to shut down his shelter, which he had been sustaining very meagerly from his own personal funds when private funding failed and the federal and provincial governments refused to provide any financial support to his initiative. Link to the National Post article and a Girl Writes What video on the story in the description. Earl's suicide came just 3 years before Ottawa would announce that it was committing $90 million over 2 years, as specified in the 2016 federal budget, on the construction and renovation of women's shelters. And nothing for men's. $90 million, but not a penny of it allotted to shelters for abused men, despite the fact that, quote, in 2014, equal proportions of men and women reported being victims of spousal violence during the preceding 5 years, 4% respectively, end quote. By these Statistics Canada numbers, that accounts for roughly 342,000 women and 418,000 men nationwide. Yeah, equal victimization rates, but no consideration in the federal budget. So to be very clear, I would feel perfectly comfortable standing my argument that men are discriminated against in Canada by our actual government systems on this point alone. However, I do have more examples. I am the child of a broken home, full disclosure. But again, my personal anecdote will be supported by legislation and documented examples. My father was forced to settle for a terribly imbalanced custody arrangement, despite being the household's leading earner and an absolutely outstanding parent, not only by my word, but even by my maternal grandmother, his mother-in-law, who said she'd never seen a better father. He got to see me every other weekend, and on Tuesday evenings because originally that's when I had sports practices, and that was it. I lost a lot of one-on-one time with my father because of the settlement that he was forced to accept. By my estimates, from the time that they split before I was 9, and then until the age of 16, when I was able to take more control of my own life, I missed out on roughly 1,883 days, or about 5 years of father-son time, because of the imbalance of family courts in my province, if not the country over. Now, unfortunately, statistics for these kinds of court proceedings haven't been reliably gathered as of late, so the most recent that I could find, as documented by the Canadian government, link in the description as always, please see Table 5 under custody. Well, they come from 1994 to 1995. If you have more recent Canadian statistics, please link me to them in the comments or tweet them to me at jtviper1991. Looking at this table, you will see that in 79.3% of all court-ordered custody cases, mother-exclusive custody was what was granted. Now keep in mind that the omission of out-of-court settlements here actually strengthens the validity of my claims of government discrimination against men, as it only shows custody as the courts have granted it. The rest of the table breaks down with 6.6% father-exclusive custody, 12.8% shared physical custody, and 1.2% of cases classified as other. I'm not entirely sure what other classifies as, possibly finding neither parent to be suitable, but then again, I'd only be speculating there. So why is it that the weight of child custody arrangements is so heavily skewed to the mother's side? Are Canadian fathers simply that incapable of caring for their children? There's a laundry list of factors that add up to maternal supremacy in child custody cases, but one of the primary issues is how the matrimonial home is defined and how end possession of the matrimonial home is assigned by the courts during divorce proceedings where no pre-existing written arrangement had been agreed upon by the parties involved. Now, the common presumption by the courts is that the child, or children, are better off with their mother unless there are grievous extenuating circumstances that would make such an arrangement untenable. As it stands, under Section 24, subsection 3 of the Family Law Act, the leading factor to deciding on possession of the matrimonial home is consideration for the best interests of the children affected. This is followed by the financial position of both spouses, the lesser earner typically retaining possession of the home, the availability of other suitable and affordable accommodation. Note that a court may presume a small apartment to be suitable and affordable for non-custodial fathers, and, quote, any violence committed by a spouse against the other spouse or the children, end quote. And if you've never heard of the silver bullet, this is where allegations of spousal abuse factor in, and as we've already seen, the government only recognizes male victims of domestic violence in statistics, but not in policy or practice, leading to a climate that inevitably disadvantages fathers as they will be less likely to have their claims of victimization heard, believed, or even if believed, acted upon. With the providing of the marital home primarily going to the mother, this leaves her in a better position to take care of the children and therefore contributes to the overwhelming weight of mother-only custody. Again, many more factors into that. That's just one of the primaries. Now, I said that I would try to keep this video relatively short, as I didn't want to occupy too much of Dragon Corsair's time, or any of my viewers' time for that matter, so this will be the final section I cover. There are many more government systems in Canada that, either by design or implementation, unfairly disadvantage men, like the structure of the educational curriculums and qualification-blind government-imposed hiring quotas, not to mention the denial of bodily integrity from birth for men in regards to male genital mutilation. But I'll hold those issues in reserve for a future video, as I've been planning to do a second part to my Becoming an MRA series titled The Fempire Strikes Back. Hold your vitriol, please. The title is meant to be humorous, not antagonistic. Anyway, on to the anti-male or possibly just pro-female discriminatory practices of Canada's criminal courts. This one is pretty cut and dry, as the data is available through Statistics Canada. Rather than waffling on about my own speculations, I would like to read to you this message from a StatsCan report titled Female Offenders in Canada. Women less likely to be sentenced to prison and receive shorter sentences. Women found guilty in adult criminal court are less likely than men to receive a prison sentence and more likely to receive probation. Females found guilty of crimes against the person in 2003 and 2004 were half as likely as their male counterparts to receive a prison sentence, 19% versus 38%, Table 5 for reference. The same was true for crimes against property, with 24% of women and 45% of men being sentenced to custody. In comparison to men, the lower proportion of women sentenced to custody held true regardless of the severity of the crime. For instance, in cases of major assault, meaning assault with a weapon or causing bodily harm, prison sentences were handed down to 1/4 of women and nearly half of men who were found guilty, 48%. Table 5 again for reference. Differences in sentencing were found with most other serious crimes, such as robbery, 62% versus 76%, break and enter, 41% versus 61%, and fraud, 20% versus 40%. In addition, when custody was ordered, median sentence lengths were usually longer for males than females. For instance, the median sentence length for female adults found guilty of crimes against the person and sentenced to custody was 30 days compared to 60 days for males. For property offenses, median terms of custody for females were also lower, 30 days versus 45 days. The document then goes on to speculate as to why these gaps may exist, bringing up the possibility that it may be due to repeat offense being less commonly reported in female offenders. However, as women are less likely to be convicted in the first place and more likely to have their charges dropped or the court cases stayed, the true rate of repeat offenders cannot be accurately placed with the available data if there are no convictions in the first place. With that all said, it is my belief that the data I have submitted here clearly demonstrates cases of both legislated and put to practice discrimination against men by the Canadian government and legal systems. Through these policies and practices, and many more that I cannot reasonably contain within the time frame of this video, it can be shown that men are subject to discrimination, which should not be accepted by the public or upheld, as it is, by the courts. Dragon Corsair, you said that you would happily watch a video if I had the time to spare for one, and thus I submit to you this short, though well-documented video essay on the subject of discrimination by the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, the Canadian Family Court System, and the Canadian Criminal Justice System. Other discriminatory legislation and practices like the denial of bodily autonomy for boys where it is legally guaranteed for girls, and the overwhelming extension of women-only scholarships in an educational climate where women already hold a significant majority of post-secondary classroom spots will be covered in a future video. Should you have any questions about the statistics cited in this video, I have left the relevant links in the description. Thank you for your time. Well, we've come to the end of another video, one made possible by patrons and viewers like you. If you've enjoyed this or any of my other videos, consider supporting me on Patreon. Rewards start with monthly contributions as low as $1, with plenty of options to choose from as you go up the contribution tiers. Want to blow shit up with me in a patrons-only World of Tanks platoon? There's a reward for that. Want to be the first to see my latest series videos and get exclusive access to Patreon-only video series? There's a reward for that too. Feel like shooting the shit about recent events in a patrons-only Google Hangout? There's a reward for that. There's even a reward that lets you dictate the topic for a new JT Viper video. So be sure to check me out at www.patreon.com/JTViper, or just click on the Patreon logo up here in the video. Go ahead, I'll give you a second. Are you clicking yet? No? One more second? Well, fine, I'll get you next time. If you can't afford to support me financially, and of course, even if you can, please be sure to leave a comment, a thumbs up, and subscribe to my channel for more of your favorite Canadian reptile. Have a good one, everybody. And again, thank you for watching.